dust chasing phantom riders. We call this Nile Be'ehuzenda, the wind of the lost. The dust is all that remains of the pony soldiers who dared to wake the dead from their sleep, doomed to ride forever in search of the tombs of the Anasazi. Navajo Legend. Chapter 1. Matthew Vicente sat on a small boulder, surveying his flock of sheep in the dim moonlight. Before the sun had gone down, he'd made one last count. There were still 251. He took a deep breath, trying to appreciate the fresh mountain air and trying to stay awake. He had 251 head. A week earlier, there had been 255. He had lost 4 sheep in as many days. He couldn't afford to spend the night in the cabin. He had to keep watch. He was going to have hell to pay as it was. 4 sheep in 4 days. He was almost glad this would be his last summer in the pastures. He would be turning 16 in another month. That meant next year he would have to get a real job. The task of watching the family flock would pass on to Michael, his younger cousin. Michael would be 13 by then, the same age Matthew was when he began minding the flock in the summer pastures. Matthew shifted the carbine on his lap. 4 sheep in 4 days. The numbers kept running through his mind. 2-3 sheep in a summer season, that was acceptable. There were lots of predators in the mountains, coyotes, bears, mountain lions. Sometimes even an eagle would carry away a lamb. He had lost 2 sheep early in the summer. That was to be expected. But things had gone well for the last 5 weeks. Now suddenly 4 sheep in 4 days. How was he going to explain that? The Vicente brothers, Abraham and Jacob, didn't keep the largest flock on the Jicarilla Apache Reservation. At 250 head, it barely represented 3% of the tribe's total. But the wool and the spring lambs the flock provided accounted for a sizable portion of the family income. The Vicente brothers weren't herdsmen or farmers. They were tribal policemen. Matthew was proud of the fact that his father Abraham, or Bram as he liked to be called, had been promoted to chief of the tribal police. Being tribal policemen, however, didn't allow much time for second jobs, so the brothers maintained a flock of sheep to supplement their wages. Keeping the flock was a family affair. Matthew's grandfather had been a sheep herder his entire life. When he was younger, Matthew spent his summers helping in the mountain pastures. After his grandfather died, it was only natural for the Vicente family to continue herding, and it made sense for Matthew to maintain the flocks. A deep sigh came from the ground next to Matthew's boulder. Boss, his lead dog, was trying to get comfortable for a short nap. Tico, Boss's mate, sat on the opposite side of the rock, watching and listening, just like her master. Matthew crossed and uncrossed his legs, trying to find a more comfortable position. Even though he had been there for 7 weeks, these highland pastures were unfamiliar to him. The herdsmen drew lots to see which mountain meadows they would use for summer grazing. The Vicente brothers were assigned pastures on the southwestern slopes of the reservation. For Matthew, it was unfamiliar territory. He was 20 miles from the nearest highway and 60 miles from his home in Dulce. His living quarters were a small one-room cabin at the edge of the pasture. He had no electricity. He drew his water from a well using a hand pump. He used a kerosene lamp at night and cooked on a kerosene stove. Once a week, his father or some other family member showed up with supplies. Except for those brief visits, his only companionship was the 2 sheepdogs. The next visit wasn't for 2 more days. He had no idea how he was going to explain the loss of 4 head. He had looked for tracks, but there were none. He had looked for splotches of blood where the animals had been attacked, but couldn't find any. Boss and Tico slept outside. They always raised the alarm when they sensed the presence of a predator. For the last 4 nights, they had been silent. Matthew began to suspect the sheep were being rustled, but it didn't make any sense. Why take only 1 sheep at a time? Why not 6 or a dozen? He had reasoned his way out of any plausible explanation. The best he could do now was make sure no more sheep disappeared, even if it meant a 24-hour watch. His father would expect that of him. All of the disappearances happened at night. He figured if he could stay awake till morning, he could always catch a few winks during the day.